Hey everybody, it's Alice Osborne, and we're here at Wonderland Book Club with guest author Rebecca Hodge. Her debut novel is Wildland, and let me share a little bit about Rebecca with you. Wildland has received rave reviews, and it just won a Silver Nautilus Award and was selected by Apple Books for their Best of the Year So Far list. And Unfortunately, Rebecca was able to present her book live before the pandemic shut everything down. So she had a great opportunity to see people before things got quiet. And her next book is coming out in September, and September 7th. It's Over the Falls, and it's a crime novel about a woman searching for the sister she hates. So be on the lookout for that. And Rebecca will be our January 2023 author. So we're excited for her. Rebecca is the author of fiction, obviously, a veterinarian and a clinical research scientist who lives and writes here in North Carolina. Fiction writing is the space where her creative side comes out to play, and her writing centers on characters who discover that life is not a spectator sport. She has 3 grown sons, 2 crazy dogs, and 1 very patient husband. When she's not writing on the back porch or brewing yet another mug of tea, she loves to hike, to travel, and of course, read. She is an avid reader. And if you are looking for a book to read this summer, please ask Rebecca. She knows everything about what's going on. And she's also she has a very full life, and she also spends something I admire about her very much. She is an active member of Wonderland Book Club, a regular participant, and that warms my heart. So someone who is a presenter who also is an active member, and we have many folks like that in the group, which makes us really strong. So, Rebecca, you have the stage.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Alice. I appreciate the kind words and your willingness to put me on your busy schedule. And thanks, everyone, for coming out on the Friday before a holiday weekend, which I know complicates life. Yeah, as Alice mentioned, I'm a North Carolinian. I grew up in Raleigh, graduated from Sanderson High School, did my undergrad work at North Carolina State as an animal science major. I predate the North Carolina State vet school, and so I went to vet school in 4 cold years at Ohio State, and promptly did a U-turn and came right back to North Carolina. And my husband and I have been here ever since. All 3 of our children grew up here in Raleigh. I am a veterinarian by training. I was in private practice for a number of years, and then was home full time for a few years while my children were young. And then when it came time for me to return to full-time work, it was difficult for me to envision emergency call hours and 3 young kids. And I fell by accident really into a position working with early phase clinical trials in humans. And so most of my professional career actually has been as a clinical research scientist, kind of serving as a link person between animal data and human data. I wrote phase 1 protocols for clinical trials in people, and focusing mainly in the area of diabetes, and worked for GlaxoSmithKline for a number of years, and then for a small biotech. Writing has been a passion for the last 15 years or so. Started out writing short stories, but I really enjoy the complexity of working with the novel. And Wildland is the 4th novel manuscript that I wrote, and the first to be published. The first 2 live in a drawer and absolutely belong there. The 3rd one I made a good college try with, but was not able to get an agent. And maybe it'll resurrect itself at some point in the future, but I certainly have a fondness for that one. But I have just been so delighted to have Wildland out in the world. I've been overwhelmed with the responses that I've gotten to it. And I'm pleased that my publisher was willing to continue to work with me with a second book. Over the Falls is the title, and here's our cover. So that comes out September 7th, and actually I'll be doing the book launch party at Quail Ridge Books on September 7th. So they've got that on their calendar. That'll be an in-person book launch. So I'm excited about that. Just to give you a little background about Wildland, the starting point for this story was a conversation I had with my youngest son, who lives in Boulder. And we were chatting on a Sunday afternoon, and he mentioned very casually that he was standing on the balcony of his apartment watching helicopters drop water on a forest fire that was close enough that he could see the flames. And so the mom part of my brain kind of freaked out a little, but the writer part of me started wondering what it would be like to set a story against the background of a fire. And so really the starting point for this book was my learning as much as I could about wildfires, how they move, how they travel, just getting a feel for what this situation and setting would be like. And I actually relied heavily on a textbook that I think is designed for forestry students that focuses solely on forest fires and how they function. And my original plan was for this to be a father-daughter book. So Scott and Lily were the first characters on the page. And as I started working with it, I quickly realized that I didn't want them both caught in a fire. I wanted Lily caught in the fire and Scott to be on the outside. Well, I couldn't dump Lily in that situation by herself. So I envisioned a woman in her 50s who was not really an outdoorsy sort of person, who was in the mountains for some reason, and that she would be with Lily. And once I knew that much, I started asking, okay, why the heck is this woman in the mountains for a month? And I started listing, names, kind of a bullet point list, and was writing all kinds of thoughts down, and found myself writing the idea that she was a breast cancer patient who had just gotten bad news and was really trying to figure out whether she was willing to pursue additional treatment. So at that point, I had to put my pen down and go for a long walk. I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary of a bilateral cancer, breast cancer diagnosis. But back then, it was only maybe 5 years in the rearview mirror, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to immerse myself in a story that related to that, because it struck a little close to home at the time. And ultimately, I decided to give it a shot. And immediately it was clear that this was now Kat's story, that she needed to be my main character and to move forward. And so the book was originally written in the alternating viewpoints of Kat and Scott. And actually that continued all the way through to the point where my agent was submitting to publishers. Malcolm and Nirav, who are probably my favorite characters of the book, actually walked into the story moderately late in the game. I was certainly very focused on Scott, Lily, and Kat as my key characters, and took a chapter into my writing group where Kat returns to the cabin and discovers that a bowl that she treasures is missing. And my writing group was like, oh yeah, we like this. This is really good, very intriguing. So who took it? And I had no idea. And so from that question, obviously the characters of Malcolm and Nirav evolved, and kind of walked away with the story. And it was actually an editor at one of the big 5 publishing houses who came back to us asking for a revise and resubmit of the manuscript. And she said, I think you've got the wrong narrator. I think Malcolm's point of view might be your better path. So I freaked out a little bit because obviously that's 40 to 50% of the book. My agent talked me down off the ledge and said, look, just dip your toe into it for a couple of chapters. You're not committing, just try it and you'll know whether this is the right way to go. And it absolutely was the right change. And so the story did not change, but the point of view changed. And of course, that let me bring in a lot of perspective that hadn't been able to make itself as well known in the original version. So it took a couple months, rewrote with the new point of view, resubmitted to that editor, and 2 weeks later she resigned from her job and left the publishing industry, and the manuscript died a quiet death in her manager's inbox. So the joys of the publishing industry. It was that revised manuscript, however, that was then submitted other places, and I ultimately found a home with Crooked Lane Books, which is the publisher of Wildland and will also be the publisher for Over the Falls. So this story has evolved over time. You read about authors who create detailed outlines of what they're going to do and know exactly what chapter 27 is going to be like before they've put a word on the page. And gosh, that sounds so tempting. It sounds so efficient. And I have been completely unable to follow that path. Maybe I'm getting a little more of a planning tendency over time. I at least try and know where I'm headed in a general path, but I definitely have not become a detailed planner of books, which I think is less efficient, but maybe more fun. So that's kind of in a nutshell the story of the roots of Wildland.
I was going to ask you about the dogs. I think Junie was maybe my favorite character.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
And I'm not a dog person.
Well, no matter what I'm writing, animals seem to wander into the storyline eventually. And I have a tremendously difficult time naming animals. I mean, that's true of my own dogs. Fortunately, once I had kids, then I'd let the kids pick names, right? But for some reason, I always have difficulty naming pets. And so in my writing, I have evolved to the approach of naming all the animals in my writing after rivers. And I try and use rivers that come from the area where the book takes place. And so Junie is named after the Juniata River in North Carolina. Ty is named after the Ty River in Virginia. In the next book, the dog's name is Tellico, and that's based off the Tellico River in Tennessee, where the book starts. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed both of those dog characters. Junie is totally fictional. Ty actually is partly true because when I was in practice as a veterinarian, I did work with a dog who had a collar fully embedded around his neck. One of those tragic cases where the owner tied a young puppy outdoors and left him there. And 6 months later, the dog was bigger and the collar was not. So that one piece of Ty's story is actually truthful. But I enjoyed having the dogs in this book. They certainly become characters by the end of the story.
Well, it was great because I was getting emotional over the dogs, and like I said, I'm not, you know, I'm dogs, kind of indifferent, but I said, oh, I
Well,
think I did get choked up in the hospital scene when Ty gets cleaned up and they're trying to figure out if he's gonna live, and
yeah,
yeah,
well, thank you. I'm
very
glad
good
that
writing.
they resonated with you. I've had people email me and say, "Okay, I would have really been pissed if you killed off the dogs." You know, it almost implied like if I lost a child or two along the way, they could deal with that, but I was not allowed to kill the dogs, and of course, I would not do that. But
So tell me, I would say the crucible of the story is toward the end when when Kat has to make the decision to stay at the beaver pond or to follow the immediate or in the fellow who just pops out of nowhere.
yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because I say that's the crucible moment where she has to believe in herself, and that was really powerful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, throughout the journey of Kat and the children as they're trying to escape from the fire, her primary motive is to try and save the kids. If she hadn't had that sense of responsibility, I'm not sure what her choice would have been. So she is really focusing on survival, but it's on the behalf of others. And she has really been debating in her own mind regarding future cancer therapy, whether she's willing to embrace that, whether it's better to kind of say, okay, enough is enough. She feels alone following the death of her husband several years ago. Her daughter is grown and functioning independent. She just feels very adrift. And so I definitely wanted to create a moment where she has to choose, where it's no longer being swept along by events and by responsibilities towards other people. She has to make a choice. And I hope that moment played realistically. I think I think contemplating death in the abstract is very different than contemplating death as an immediate presence. And I think that uh, was likely a factor in her decision. But I also think that the very human connections that she has made, both with Malcolm and with the children over the course of the book, likely factored into her decision to keep fighting. And even though she makes that choice in that instant, she continues in the follow through chapters to struggle with how committed she is to looking ahead in her life, and ultimately decides to choose life. Yeah, well, I'm glad that moment resonated with you.
Yeah, because she had to say, well, what, well, that's where you have to believe in yourself. And she told the children, this is where we are, and she couldn't back out. I mean, it would have looked silly to just say this guy pops in and, you know, he's he's right because he's so confident. And I think she believes, well, why is he so confident? I'm confident. Why should that erode my confidence and my beliefs just because
Yeah,
he's confident? And
yeah.
the facts don't add up.
Yeah, well, and she had been hoping multiple times for a magical solution.
Yeah,
Can't something magical happen? Well, here it is. Here's a stranger who claims to know how to get them out,
right.
and she rejects that and trusts her own judgment. So, yeah, yeah, Thank you.
That's a good lesson.
Rebecca?
I'll think about that scene a lot if I'm in a moment. I just thought you did such a nice job.
Oh, thank you.
Rebecca, this
Mhm.
is Alice. I think the resolution of her dilemma is at the very end on page 323, and I thought you dealt with it really very well. She quotes, "The stars above us govern our conditions," and then you have Malcolm with a quote, "It's not in the stars to hold our destiny, but in ourselves." And it seems to be that that's when she realized,
Yeah,
you know, what
I think
she was going to do and why.
that was definitely a tipping point. And one of the things I had a lot of fun with the book was the Shakespeare quotes. You know, once it became clear that Kat kind of thought in terms of quotes, I spent probably way too much time creating like this long list of 30 or 40, you know, cool Shakespeare quotes, and then working to see where they might fit realistically. And yeah, that was part of the fun.
I thought that added a dimension to the character.
Thank you.
Rebecca, I also dwell over the same problem. In my case, I actually got taken by a sentence a lot earlier in the book. I think it's in page 142, where she actually says that she's going to dig deep. And she talks about the experiences, the surgeries, the weeks of chemotherapy, surviving the death of Jim. And, you know, personally, I did have cancer. And I think that when you contemplate that abysm of nothingness, is where you get the strength to do things.
Yeah.
And I think that is at that point, I wonder about the story that where she gets that energy, that power. And although you could be doubtful, it's from that experience that she goes forward.
Yeah.
Without that, I doubt that she will do it, because we tend to think that people will do all these extraordinary things, but when something crazy happens, like a fire, an accident, many people get paralyzed.
Yeah.
And I think it's
I think it's a great point. A great point. Well, and I think she also is impacted by her friendship with Malcolm, and by her seeing the way that Malcolm is dealing with a disfiguring scar on his face, which he just, you know, deals with. And she has such mixed feelings about surgical scars and what she's been through. And, you know, I think he serves as an example to her. And I really had such fun with the character of Malcolm. I loved the fact that he is so super competent as a military person, and so utterly overwhelmed in his new role as a dad, and just like, you know, this is more than I can deal with. So, so I enjoyed that contrast quite a bit.
And I was thinking about her age, Kat's age, and her daughter Sarah's age. So did Kat have Sarah when she was 21? She seems a queer person to me.
Yeah, I mean, that was the way that I had kind of envisioned it, is that you know, married young and had her young, and then, you know, worked as a teacher through her working career. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, well, she's awfully young to have a 30-year-old.
Well, I think Kat's age shifted a little bit back and forth as I was working on revisions, but yeah.
Is she pictured as the cover girl on the cover? Or is that someone else?
No, actually not. So as you may know, the title of a book and the cover of the book actually belong to the marketing department, not to the author. And so the book, when it was sold, was called Margin of Safety. And the publisher immediately decided that the word margin was too technical, which I still haven't figured that one out. And so the title became Edge of Safety. And I worked closely with the publisher and the cover design person, and the proposed cover, the cover that was actually approved, Did not have people in it, and it was a silhouette of trees standing at the edge of a pond with flames behind it. So the fire was very present in the cover. And that cover was released. I mean, we did a cover reveal, and the book went out for early reviews under that cover. And so we're cruising along, and I opened my email one day, and there's an email entitled Changing Cover and Title. And you know, when you're a debut author and you're counting down towards a book release, that is not the email you want to see in your inbox. And the publisher was not happy with the uptake of interest from reviewers, and they felt that the title and cover just wasn't hitting the right note. And both my agent and I felt very strongly that the publisher was not pleased with the way things were going, and they were willing to make a change, which is awesome because it's so easy for people to shrug and say, well, we blew that one and move on. They were willing to make a change. And so we basically went back to them and said, look, you've identified an issue, do what you want to fix it. We're going to stay out of it. You know, this is your ball to play with. And so for 6 or 7 weeks, it was silent. And then they emailed me this title and cover, which is what the book came out with. And I loved it. I loved it. But the word wildland, if it's written as a single word, is actually a term used by firefighters. It refers to undeveloped land that is at potential risk for fire. And but the publisher came up with that. The word doesn't appear in the book anywhere. And the woman pictured, to me, doesn't look old enough to be in her early 50s. That was completely the publisher's doing. I think it was the right call. I've gotten tremendously positive feedback on the cover. And so I'm deeply appreciative of the fact that they were willing to act when they developed concerns.
Right. Can you can you hold your book up so I can take a picture?
Yeah, there we go.
All right. Smile. I have to wait for it to come back.
All right.
There you go. So you got to say something. All right, go ahead. There we go.
Did you get it?
I got 3. Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully I don't look too dorky. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's definitely not Lily.
No. Yeah. But the publishing industry has its own way of doing things. And in this case, they definitely knew what they were doing much better than I did. So fair enough.
Can you talk a little bit about Scott's emotional journey, how he was such a dweeb and how he kept stepping all over himself and saying the wrong things and being the comic relief, and then he really shows up?
Yeah, well, so recall that the book was originally written with him as a point of view character. And so at that time, you're really a lot more in his head of kind of being a paranoid, borderline paranoid person, very distrustful, definitely distrustful of people with a military background because of things that happened in his history. And he's a father who really genuinely loves his daughter, but is pretty clueless about how to relate to her as a divorced father who doesn't have much time with her. And he initially is very resentful of Malcolm and Malcolm's competence. But over time, the realities of the situation force the two men into a partnership. And then when he has to, Scott steps up and does what he doesn't believe he can do in actively rescuing the kids and Kat. And I do picture Scott as a changed person by the end of the story. You know, Malcolm potentially is more comfortable with his parenting role, maybe, but he's not dramatically different at the end than he is at the beginning. Scott has had his eyes opened, both in terms, I think, of how deeply he cares for Lily and what he's willing to risk for her, and also in recognition of what he was able to do, you know, in what was obviously terrifying circumstances. I definitely decided early on that I did not want Malcolm being the rescuer, because that's too easy, right? That's where his strength lies. I wanted Scott to be put in a position where he had to act.
And I also noticed you did a great job of leaving breadcrumbs or foreshadowing, so then later the situation would present itself. You know, with the bowl, with the dogs, and then we also had Malcolm's injury of the hiker kicking him in the elbow. So when he has the elbow injury and then the break, he can't physically help. So everything was lined up perfectly. Did you have to have a big butcher block sheet of paper to keep up all these plot, you know, the cause and effects that were happening in your story? Because you did an amazing job.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, a lot of that evolves in multiple revision iterations, you know, and sometimes the idea hits on page 200 and then you go back and filter it in where it needs to be earlier. In my professional work in doing clinical research, I spent a lot of time working in Excel. And so my writing group gives me grief anytime this comes up, but I outline in Excel, not when I'm first writing, but after I've got a manuscript, then I go back and I map the book out on an Excel spreadsheet, listing the chapter, the number of pages, whose point of view it is, where it happens, what key events, what backstory is provided at that point. You know, I've got columns all over. So I know a lot of people who do use a whiteboard or Post-it notes all over the wall of their study. But just because it's second nature for me, I tend to do things in Excel. And I find that having that kind of roadmap makes it much easier to identify gaps, to realize that, oh, wait, I had a character come on stage back here and now it's 50 pages later, we haven't seen him again, but he's a character we want to follow, you know, things like that that are missing that maybe don't jump out at me in a read through of the manuscript, but when I've got it in outline form, it becomes more obvious to me.
Yeah, that was really, really well done. And did you know right away that you were going to do multiple points of views instead
Yeah.
of helping Kat?
I did. Really, that was driven by my decision that people would be inside the fire and outside the fire. And I felt that was a logical setup to have those 2 points of view of the same situation. In Over the Falls, I also have 2 points of view, and one is a point of view out of an adult, and the other is of her 14-year-old nephew. And so there, the 2 different points of view were helpful because they're both keeping secrets from each other. And so as the reader, you're able to know what's going on in each of their heads, and you know, you're getting more clues coming to you than either of them are aware of. So I think different points of view are helpful for different reasons. The the manuscript I'm working on now, which may, in theory, become a third book, but obviously we got a ways to go before I'll know about that. That is from a single point of view, but there are some short journal entries from another character that are interspersed. So in that case, there really wasn't a reason that I needed two distinct points of view, except at a couple of critical moments, and the journal entries seem to meet that need.
Great. Yeah. Another tragedy is the loss of all of the scrapbooks, and how Kat believes this is what her daughter wants. Can you talk us through that? And it was sad that they burned, but I think it will help their relationship going forward, like and it was a metaphor for the past and the present and the future.
Yeah. So when Kat retreats to the mountains, she takes boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that she has saved over the years, memorabilia, much of it relating to her daughter. And she envisions that one of the things she's going to accomplish is she's going to organize all this. This is going to be the gift to her daughter. She envisions them perhaps sitting and going through it together. The two of them are certainly, they have a reasonable relationship, but they're not super close. And I think she views this journey through the past as a way of connecting strongly, particularly if her time is limited in the future. And of course, all of that stuff is destroyed completely in the fire. And she just feels awful. Here was this thing that she knew her daughter was going to value. And her daughter could care less. I mean, what she cares about is the fact that her mother is there and that she survived the fire. And I think that's an important piece of feedback for Kat to have heard, for her to recognize that her daughter is valuing her for herself.
Yeah. And I also noticed that Scott notices Lily being, a moment where she's not, she has a moment of sadness, and he says, it's okay, you don't have to move on from it. And that was very powerful, because her mom said, oh, don't worry about it, you can just keep going, you don't have to put the past behind you. And tell us a little bit more about that scene.
Yeah, I really wanted to demonstrate that Scott was changed, that he, for all his imperfections, which obviously don't get erased in one fell swoop, but despite that, he is trying to tune into his daughter more and is respectful of what she's going through. And plus, he went through some of that terror himself, and so can relate directly to what she's feeling. And certainly, he's struggling to move past it. So he can be empathetic to what she's doing. And I do think it's easy for someone who's not being involved to say, oh, get over it. You just need to keep moving and don't think about it. Just, keep cruising. Let's go clothes shopping or buying a new pair of shoes. And he, I think, is the better one to recognize that she's struggling. And I had fun with the fact that Lily then chooses to spend more time with her father, even though she was pretty frustrated at the outset of the story about being forced to hang out with him in the middle of nowhere. So I had fun with that.
And you wrote Lily really well. She sure sounded like a 13-year-old, 12-year-old kid.
Thank you. I really struggle with that. I've raised 3 boys and I have very distinct memories, but I often can't associate those memories with a specific age, you know. So I'm always pinging my friends who have kids the exact age I'm writing about and going, okay, you've got a 14-year-old boy. So would he be doing this, and this, you know, because you would think I have it figured out, but I definitely don't. It may reflect my memory fading over time.
You go through a fire, that's PTSD. I mean, none of our characters got well, the dog Junie got pretty injured, but nobody really got seriously burned. I mean, it was more smoke inhalation, but I mean, healing from a fire takes a long time.
Yeah,
And you can't get over it. I mean, it's a whole change of everything.
It's a major trauma. Yeah. Well, and one of the questions I get asked a lot is about research for the book. And I mentioned that I did a lot of reading about fires, but I also ended up reading about smoke inhalation, you know, acute symptoms, how people recover from smoke inhalation, you know, the risks involved in subsequent days. Reading about adoption requirements in Pakistan. Interestingly, my original thought was that Nirav would come from Afghanistan, but when I investigated, Afghanistan prohibits foreign adoptions. Pakistan prohibits foreign adoptions of Muslim children, but permits it for Hindu children, which pretty much summarizes in one statement the situation of the Hindu minority in Pakistan. And that's what prompted me to give Nirav a Hindu background and to kind of try and pull that into the story. It's amazing what you end up having to look up. All the Shakespeare quotes. It was one of my writing group friends who said, oh, you need leeches in the pond. And I'm like, no. I mean, leeches don't exist in North Carolina ponds, do they? And then I looked it up, and apparently there are 26 species of leeches that live in North Carolina waters. And most of them are like specific to fish and, you know, don't bother people. But I'll tell you, I'm not wading into a mucky pond any time in the future. So yeah, that was a bit of an unexpected learning in my research. And the research that probably I am most worried about was relating to the helicopter. There are YouTube videos on how you fly a helicopter and how helicopters react to different situations. But if I screwed something up, that was probably it. So I live in fear that an actual helicopter pilot will read the book someday and send me a list of mistakes I made. I tried hard, but it's certainly possible that I did not get everything right on that.
Have you ever been in a helicopter?
No, I've never flown in a helicopter.
Yeah, I would like to do that, but it felt like I was in a helicopter the whole time. So I believe your writing worked. I felt very claustrophobic, and it was loud, and it was scary with the drafts, and it was you know, you could fall out the window.
The power of imagination.
So it worked great for me. And I was going to say thank you for not giving anybody intestinal distress from drinking pond water.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
I was like, oh no, don't put that in there. We don't need that.
Yeah.
We have Alice has a question. She wants to know how long it took you to write the book.
So I was working full time when I wrote the book, and so my writing was really restricted to weekends. And it took me about 2 years to reach the point where I was like, okay, this is solid. And it took me about 9 months to get an agent. I was querying agents, just, blank queries out of the slush pile queries. And in parallel to that, I'm a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and they have an annual contest for unpublished manuscript called the Rising Star Award. And so I was querying agents, but I also submitted the manuscript into the Rising Star Award and placed as a finalist, which totally blew me away. And the manuscripts selected as finalists were then judged by a panel of agents. And so what happened was that I got an agent who wanted to represent the book through my query letters, and simultaneously one of the agents who was a judge for the contest also reached out and offered representation. And she was the person I went with. My agent is Nalinia Kolakar of Spencer Hill Associates. And I know several people who are represented by her. And so she came highly recommended. So that process took about 9 months, and then it took us 18 months to find a publisher, which is painfully long. And of course, there were some revision work going on in the background during that period. And then once I signed the contract, a year from contract signature to book release. And so when you add all that up together, it was 5 years from the time that I started working on the book to the time that it was released. I'm a little faster in the writing phase now. I still do some consulting, but I'm not working full time anymore. Retired from that work, and so the writing phase is maybe a little faster. And of course, the get the agent phase, thank heavens, I don't have to repeat. Publishing is a slow process.
Rebecca, I found your ability to write suspense just remarkable. So I wasn't surprised with your podcast about writing suspense. For those who were not able to hear that, could you give us a little snippet about how you go about writing suspense?
Yeah. So what Paget is talking about is that as part of the WFWA, on their group website, people will create short videos, on single topics. I think they try and post one thing a month or something like that. And so I did a video presentation on the top 10 techniques for creating suspense. Oh Lord, now I'm not sure I can remember all 10 of them, but things that were included were setting the stage, making sure that you created a believable situation that was leading into your moment of suspense, having things happen in steps. So instead of in a single sentence saying, there was an earthquake, the building collapsed, and our hero was trapped under rubble without a phone, you make that happen in steps. You focus on the earthquake, then you focus on the fact that the realization that your hero is trapped and what that situation is like. And then as a separate step, you have her hunting for the phone and realizing that she doesn't have it, so that taking that kind of stepwise approach. In terms of writing specifically, using short sentences when things are intense, very crisp wording, using personification. That's one of my favorite literary devices to convey suspense. There's a lot of places in the book where the fire is personified and functioning as a person would have. Oh, goodness gracious. Editing. when I write a scene of suspense, I tend to throw a whole lot in there, but then I am editing. I easily spend 10 times as much time on a suspenseful scene than a quiet scene, because I think it's important to get every moment of that tension in place. Paget, what am I forgetting?
Well, you just did a remarkable job. To me, the suspense was as much a character as the characters were. Just thinking about it right now, Rebecca, I have goosebumps. It was suspenseful to me.
Well, thank you. I've presented to a number of book clubs online in recent months, and people have told me that they could smell the smoke when they were reading, and gosh, that warms my heart.
Yes.
Really makes me feel good. Yeah.
Great job. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks.
Rebecca, are you ready to read a few passages?
I can, yeah. So I'm just going to read a couple of pages here. And this is Kat and the children and dogs have realized that there's a fire down in the valley. They've fled the cottage and gone downhill on the only access road that exists. And they've reached a point where where the road is blocked. So that's where we are. Kat climbed out of the car, coughing as she took in a lungful of smoke. Her eyes watered and she blinked hard to see. Intense heat pulsed toward her as if the fire were exhaling to warn her away. She stood at least 10 yards back, but the heat seared her face and the fronts of her arms and legs. She broke into an instant sweat. Glowing cinders blew forward from the flames, too, landing on her shorts. She brushed them off fast, but they left flecks of black on the fabric. Ashes clung to her hair, her face, her clothing. She took a few tentative steps toward the tangle blocking their way, but the fire advanced, jumping toward her along the dry grass that lined the verge of the road. Bizarrely, birds, red-winged blackbirds, sparrows, even a few bluebirds swooped low to the ground at the very edge of the advancing flames. Kat watched in confusion until a grasshopper leaped high in panic, only to be plucked from the air in mid-jump by a barn swallow. Kat wanted to run, wanted to scream, but her legs froze and her voice locked. She stood hypnotized, staring at the flames, transfixed like a mouse immobilized by the sight of a cat. The fire spoke in tongues, pops and crackles as pockets of sap exploded, whispers as the dry grasses caught, shuddering crashes as branches and whole trees fell in the distance. She had imagined a nicely behaved fire, something managed by a friendly red fire engine with a stream of water sufficient to quell a nuisance. Such suburban approaches would be hopeless here. This fire wasn't domesticated, it was a predator. Kat trembled, tentacles of fear tightening down on every muscle, her body crackling with tension. She'd convinced herself she could meet death head on, but she hadn't expected it so soon. She was going to die on this mountain, not home in her bed. She had minutes, not months, and she couldn't even tell Sarah goodbye. Grief flooded every cell and swamped her thinking. She shook herself, forcing herself back into action. Move, damn it, do something. She couldn't afford to waste time. She glanced into the trees and underbrush on the right, thinking perhaps they could scramble around the burning roadblock on foot. But the thick undergrowth already smoldered. Even if she'd been alone, she didn't think she could outflank the flames. Kat coughed and wiped her eyes against her sleeve, her head pounding, then hurried back to the car and got in. She twisted in her seat and gave the children what she hoped was a reassuring look. But based on the horrified expressions on their faces, they must have recognized the truth. We'll be fine. Perhaps if she kept saying it, she'd believe it. The words didn't stop her heart from pummeling her ribs with a force that shook her whole body. She glanced at her cell phone. No bars, no signal, no surprise. We'll be fine, honest. She threw the car into reverse. We'll just move on to plan B. Her voice shook only a little, sounding almost confident, an actress playing her part. Inside, pure terror was winning. They weren't going to drive down this mountain to safety. They weren't going to reach Scott and Malcolm. They weren't going to call anyone for rescue. Plan B didn't exist. And that's a chapter ending. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, the burden's on her. She can't rely on anybody else. She's the AIC, the adult in charge.
Yeah. Well, I got the pleasure of recording a podcast with the Charlotte Readers podcast. With Landis, and I read the same couple of pages with him, and that'll be released in July. He records way ahead, so I'm looking forward to that.
Cool. Do you know when it's going to be in July, like early or mid-July?
Yeah, it's late July. Hang on, while we're talking, I'll pull up my calendar. I think I've got it logged in, but yeah, I think it's the 20-something. July 27th is the podcast release date. So. All
right, I'm writing that down.
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Yeah. If you all haven't listened. Yeah.
I have a comment about the book. I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. And what I liked about it, I didn't know anything about it when I started reading the book. And I thought it was going to be at first a story just about, Kat, not sure about whether she wants to fight the cancer. Now she meets a guy who's disfigured. She's worried about her disfigurement. His son has a disfigurement. So we're going to go in this direction, the kids. So this is going to bring her around. But then when the fire started, and now that started, I said, holy mackerel. Then you're into it like, I know it's going to be like a fight for multiple lives through the thing. So I thought it was very, very good the way you did that. I enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I loved it. I couldn't put it down. I finished it before he did. And I just said, I'm sorry. I can't do anything until I finish this book. And I love when a book does that to me. I don't have time for books to do that to me, but I loved it so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so glad that it had that effect on you.
And the fact that your next to be a crime novel, so I'm really interested in reading that one.
Well, it's interesting. I'm not sure I would actually have labeled it that way. Again, the publisher and the marketing people do categorize it as a crime novel, and I get that. I mean, there is a crime involved, and that certainly is a theme. In the posts that I've been doing about the book on Instagram, I've been putting crime fiction with characters you'll fall for, because it's very character driven, and the lead character is living a very isolated life at the beginning of the book. She's been hurt by a betrayal from her sister years past that has led her to really retreat from life. And when her nephew, whom she's never met, arrives on her doorstep seeking her help because his mother has disappeared, she's really forced to step out of her comfort zone and try and help the nephew out. And part of her motivation is to help him. Part of the motivation is that she's threatened by the antagonist in the story, the bad guy in the story. And so multiple motivations for trying to find her sister. So it's different. There are some suspenseful scenes in the book, or hopefully they are suspenseful. It's not quite the relentless craziness that Wildland is. It's hard to have suspense carry forward for so many pages. A Wildfire, I think, is kind of unique in being able to create that.
it coming out again, the new book?
It's coming out September 7th, and it'll release in hardback and an ebook, and there should be an audiobook close on that date. I don't have a confirmation of the release date for the audiobook. And somewhat to my surprise, the publisher is going to release Wildland in paperback, in a trade paperback format, and that'll come out in February of next year. So 2 years after the hardback release, they're going to go with a paperback release, which, gosh, yeah, that's awesome. But that definitely surprised me.
Well, we look forward to it.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much. Well, I appreciate all your great feedback. And if you have a minute to leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads, that's always greatly appreciated. If you have a friend who asks you for a book recommendation, it's always wonderful. We pass your enthusiasm along.
Yeah, I already told 10 people, so.
All right. You rock.
Yeah.
You rock.
Tell us about the audiobook, because the narrator could do multiple voices, and she could sound pretty bitchy.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm bad. I can't remember the narrator's name. So the Crooked Lane, my publisher, retained audiobook rights. So they were responsible for initiating an audiobook, and they contracted with a company called DreamWorks. They now have a close working relationship with DreamWorks, but at the time, this was a one-off relationship. And DreamWorks proposed a narrator. Sorry, I can't remember her name, and sent me her name and asked for my feedback. And so if you go online, like on Amazon or places like that, you can listen to short clips of the audiobook version. And so I sampled, 20 books or so that this woman had done, and several of them had multiple narrators, both male and female, and she pulled it off well in those samples. And so I emailed back and said, yeah, this is great, go for it. And interestingly, a couple weeks later, I got an email from her in which she listed any words that she wanted clarification on pronunciation. So Nirav's name, I dedicated to my parents' last name. She wanted to confirm how to pronounce it. And so she had, gone through the book with that level of detail to identify any clarifications. And I am not a good audiobook listener. I'm extremely visual learning, even through years of college, etc. I always had to take written notes, because if I was just listening, I wouldn't retain it. And so I don't tend to listen to audiobooks. So I'm embarrassed to admit that I have not listened to the entire thing. But people who have listened to the whole audiobook have told me that they really enjoyed it, and that it was a good job. And certainly the parts I've heard have been good. So if you know audiobook folks, it's available through Audible, through Chirp, through really any of the big subscription services that do audiobooks. It's there as part of that.
Yeah, she did an amazing job, and she pronounced everything perfectly. I've listened to some audiobooks where they can't pronounce anything. I mean, it's awful. It's embarrassing. And it's nice to be driving again, so I can listen to audiobooks.
Oh, that's good.
Long
good.
distances.
Well,
Yeah. And
I'm glad
I didn't fall asleep. That's my problem. I'm driving and I'm like, I'm getting sleepy.
I know. Well, good.
Not your book, and not that narrator. She did a great. So I did a mix of Kindle reading on the iPad, and then on my phone, and then on audio. And I got the whole book read because I drove like over 7 hours between Friday and Saturday last week. So I got it all done. By Saturday night, the book was read.
Oh, that's awesome.
So,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
And I tell folks, yeah, if you don't have time, what's your excuse? Just go and read and hybrid it and get it done. Get it done.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, so well done. Well, folks, I want more questions from you guys. Go ahead, and you don't have to put them in the chat. You can go ahead and shout them out. I'm going to move our screen to gallery so I can see everybody.
Well, I have a couple of comments, Rebecca.
Yeah, Alice.
I really enjoyed the book. I
Thank you.
admire your writing, and I don't say that often.
Oh, thank you.
You said that you wanted to deal with the complexity of a novel. You have built in multiple complexities in this novel, and they all work. And one of the major things that I got out of the novel, other than the suspense that Paget talked about, which I thought you handled beautifully, were the themes of what I would call the human condition, dealing with the breast cancer. I too am a breast cancer survivor, as are several in my family. I had a dear friend die of metastatic breast cancer. And I felt that you dealt with that issue sensitively and with care.
Thank you.
The other theme that struck me was the bonds that develop among people who are wounded, physically wounded. Kat, Malcolm, Nirav. And that cuts through the book. I mean, that comes back time and again.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I could identify with was the feeling, I don't know how you captured this, was the feeling that someone gets about somebody else doing the remarkable thing, a person outside yourself. When Kat said, you know, I don't feel as if I did that. I feel as if someone else did it. Those three things are themes that run through life. And I thought you dealt with them extremely well.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I think we all have moments in life where we feel like we're acting a role, you know? I mean, where Kat is trying to put on a brave front to not frighten the children, where she is trying to, you know, take decisive action at moments when she's really scared to death. That certainly resonates with me. And one of the best things about having Malcolm as a narrator was that I could put in that scene where he first meets Nirav. I had actually written that scene as background information just for me. I mean, I felt like I needed to understand the roots of their relationship. And when I switched from Scott's point of view to Malcolm's point of view, I was like, all right, I am putting that scene in there, you know, because I did think that it was easy for me to envision a boy who's dealing with loss and with scars immediately connecting to somebody who he recognized had dealt with similar damage. And so I was very pleased that I could pull that out of background material and put it into the book.
Rebecca, I need to ask my question. You know, it wouldn't be a.
Are
you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. See, as a longtime attendee, I prepare. Let me find it here.
Before you read that, though, I just wanted to thank you for your work with animals. Obviously, resonates deeply with me. But also what you just said, I don't remember who you said that to, but you said, you know, please leave a review. But also, if friends are asking about books, please think of my book. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that more.
Well, it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
we all live on a budget. I mean, nobody can purchase 65 million books a year. And I definitely empathize with people who, you know, rely completely on libraries and use bookstores, etc. But I guess I would point out that purchasing used books does not benefit the author in any way.
That's right.
Library books obviously do benefit the author. But if you are giving someone a gift of a book, that's a wonderful opportunity. Instead of reaching for a John Grisham novel, and you know, John Grisham's a great guy, supporting him is wonderful, but instead of reaching for that John Grisham, look for a debut novelist or a local writer or somebody who is earlier in their writing career, because then your purchase definitely makes a difference. And so it's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. I mean, I give books as gifts a lot, and I don't know if you find yourself in that position as well, but at any rate, it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I really appreciate you pointing that out. A lot of readers aren't even aware of how much Amazon takes too. So
oh yeah, I mean it's
yeah.
I mean the amount of money that you earn from as a debut novelist, I mean, you know, it's not cash flow that you can rely on for supporting oneself in any way, shape, or form. And you know, the comment my agent has made, we've discussed the possibility of exploring a larger publisher for my third book, because Crooked Lane has a very limited distribution of books. And her comment was, okay, you need to realize that the level of support you're going to get is probably not going to be any bigger at a big publishing house, because really they pick 2 or 3 authors that they put their marketing dollars and emphasis behind, and everyone else is kind of in the slush pile. And she says, and really you also have to recognize that it takes at least 3 books to really build a career, and probably takes up to 5 books before there's appreciable income. And I always feel like writing my agent letters of apology, because based on what she has earned from Wildland and the number of hours that I know she has spent on me, I mean, I'm not paying her enough. I keep bracing myself for her to say, okay, enough of this, you know, but she's hanging in there. So I guess that's good. All right, favorite sentence. Okay, so this is 2 sentences. Fire owned the entire mountainside. Death wasn't a black hooded creature with a scythe in its hand, but a red demon shrouded in a billowing cloak of tar black smoke, devouring everything in its path. It was coming for them now, its jaws gaping, hungry for anyone in its way.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, that's my example of personification of, you know, taking an antagonist that's non-human and giving human characteristics. So.
Yeah. It also adds to the suspense. I just love the review today that you have given us. It's so insightful into how to, I mean, you've kind of done a writing critique for us just in your presentation. Do you sense that, Ellis? I just feel like this has been so comprehensive. I've loved it. And I love your love of the animals. I must say, years and years ago, that marvelous movie, Dancing with Wolves, they lost me when they shot the wolf dog. It was awful. So I just love that you saved the animals.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I had a very solid background in writing in like middle school and high school. You know, I'm old enough that I date back to the era where I was taught to use a slide rule in middle school.
Wow.
And English classes were very fundamentally based. But then I managed to somehow go through 8 years of college without a single writing class.
Amazing.
Very, very science focused. And of course,
STEM,
grad
right.
school was all science.
Yeah.
And so the bad news was that when I became interested in writing with a little more seriousness, the bad news was I had no clue what I was doing. The good news was I knew it. And so really tried to be very sensible in doing workshops and trying to teach myself and getting involved with the writing group and things like that. And certainly have come a long way. But I'll share a funny story with you. I grew up here in North Hills in Raleigh and grew up with David Sedaris. He and I were in elementary school, middle school, high school, etc. And Sanderson High School, if you know the high school in Raleigh, our arch rival at the time was Broughton downtown. So like football, basketball, they were the school to beat. And Ann Tyler graduated from Broughton. And when David and I were in high school, Ann Tyler's first 3 or 4 books had been published and were receiving quite a bit of attention. And so multiple times, English teachers would stand in front of the room and say, okay, Broughton has Ann Tyler. We need a writer from Sanderson. And so I always laughed because I think David was clearly the person paying attention, and he is the one who has taken that ball and run with it. But I always find that funny to recollect.
It's great.
And his family, I mean, Amy Sedaris, she's a force of her own too. I mean, that whole family.
A lot of talent in that family.
A lot
For
of
sure.
talent. So that is so cool that you guys grew up together.
Back then I was Becky Elliman. So, anyway, long time back.
Very, very nice. Very nice. So what advice would you give a young writer, either chronologically or non-chronologically, Rebecca?
Yeah. I think it's important to recognize that writing is a never-ending learning curve. I learn new things every time I try and tackle a writing project. And so being open for feedback and receptive of learning new things, I think is key. And I think just brute force persistence is key. Writing is a situation where what you put into what you're doing does not necessarily relate to what comes back to you. Like in a job, you kind of figure if I'm doing a great job at the job, then there's benefits to that. There's feedback, there's promotions, something comes back to me. And writing is not that way because there is an element of luck. There's an element of, the way that the publishing industry is leaning at the moment. There are lots of factors that are completely out of your control. A dear friend of mine launched a truly amazing novel 1 week after Trump was elected. And you better believe that nobody was thinking about books when her book came out. And, you can't control things like that. And so you need to anchor into having pleasure in the process, that there has to be, you need to find things that feed you in the doing, because the outcome is something that is out of your hands.
That's great
Rebecca,
advice.
a comment. Certainly I enjoy the book. It's really a fast read and I enjoy the action. What we learned different things in Wonderland, perhaps about different books. And your book has a great balance between the action, the events that happen, and character development. If this is sort of a thriller, if this would be a movie, we will call it a disaster movie. But the truth is that in many of these books, the action is front-loaded, so there is no time to actually learn about the characters, like the scene with Sarah at the beginning of the book. This is not common, and in fact, we are copying the movie so much that books start with action that happens in the middle of the book, like the movies, and then, I don't know, 3 months earlier, this happened. You don't do that, but you still succeed in creating an interesting book. And I think that's something that we should learn. And in crime fiction, and you mentioned your second book, there is a lot of character development, but between different books in a series. When you follow like a detective like Wildland, that you get to know them, but through many books. But again, we have the problem of action taking over everything. And I think that you have solved that in this book. And I don't know what's your opinion or how you will manage that.
Yeah, I think it's a hard balancing act, because we definitely live in an era where readers, editors, and publishers are all expecting to drop into a story very quickly. And I think this is also reinforced by the fact that you can now quickly access first chapters. I mean, if you're doing an ebook, you can download a sample chapter or two. Even if you're going to buy the hardback copy, you can go online and read samples from the first chapter. And so there's a lot of pressure on those first pages to engage the reader, to give the reader an idea of what the story is about, and to move forward. And at the same time, you don't want to sacrifice that look into who your characters are before things get busy. I'm a real fan of Donald Moss and his books about writing. And one of the things that he talks about is starting a story with bridging conflict, so that the main conflict of the story may not happen until the 25% mark or later in the book, but that something is happening early, so you get that instant engagement, but you don't sacrifice the opportunity to get some background information before things get busy. In Over the Falls, in the opening scene, our main character is searching for her goat, which is missing, finds her. She's gone into labor early, and she's trying to assist this goat when a boy arrives. And she doesn't even look at him, just come here. I need your help. You hold the goat, so you've got a lot of action going on. She ends up completing the delivery and then looks at this boy and realizes that this is her nephew. And so you've got intense moments really fast, but it's leading into then your opportunity to dig into the characters and learn about the situation that will drive the book. And I really like that idea of bridging tension. And I tried to use the conflict between Sarah and her mother in that way in Wildland.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I have met Donald Mass. I actually was privileged to have a 3-hour session in a conference with him.
Yeah.
He's an amazing thinker about writing.
I get to go to Albuquerque in the fall for a workshop that he's leading, and I am really looking forward to it.
Yeah, back in 2003, at my very first North Carolina Writers Network conference in Wilmington, Donald Moss was one of the speakers.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, characters have to do something extraordinary, like, punch a guy. You got to have something. You got to have something going on, or how they react in a scene. People just don't talk to each other. You got to have, what's extreme, and that. I do think about that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
he's kind of a genius. All right, folks. We need more questions.
Well, I really appreciate you all coming out today. I mean, this has been awesome. I just have so much fun talking to people who have read the book, and yeah, that has absolutely been the best part of having this book out in the world. The community of Broken Bow, Nebraska selected the book for their community read. And a couple of weeks ago, I got to Zoom in to, it's like 25 or 30 library patrons who had all read the book, and they had talked about it, and it was so much fun. And the librarians had just pulled out all the stops. They had different speakers come in each month. They had a firefighter come in and talk about wildfire management. They had a dog trainer come in and talk about training dogs and, things that tied into the book. And, that is, I'm not a great marketing person, social media is not my favorite thing. I kind of dutifully do some posts, and feel free to follow me if you're desperate for that. But it's the personal interaction that I really enjoy. So thank you so much for letting me ramble on this morning.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. We met at Mary Elmore's. She had an event at Peddler Wine and Beer. That must have been 2019, maybe.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And we became friends after that. And then you were telling me about your book, and I said, well, would you like to be a book club?
Exactly.
And I just got so lucky, because your book is amazing. I was like, wow, I got a good one.
Well, thank you.
Rebecca,
you became such a wonderful member too of our group. So thank you for giving so much, and putting a lot of time into our group too, by showing up and every month. So that means a lot.
Thank you.
Rebecca, will you visit book clubs to talk with them? People?
Oh, absolutely. Delighted to. My book club meetings, unfortunately, have been almost completely through Zoom, because the book came out just right a few weeks before COVID really hit in earnest. But I've done, quite a few local book clubs, and of course with Zoom, I've done book clubs from distances too. And just drop me an email anytime. I'm delighted to do book clubs. It's always fun.
I know a couple in Pinehurst, and that's not too far away. You could go and come in one day.
Sure.
And they're beginning the in-person meetings next September.
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to meet people part way. So that's great.
My alternate book club has started meeting outside, Rebecca. Would you consider that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I'm good with things that are within an easy driving area. I did a Zoom meeting with a group down at Carolina Beach, and they were in a bar. It was hysterically funny. They were in like a table in the corner of the bar. The waiter was bringing food and all this kind of stuff. But we had a lot of fun. It was definitely the most unique book club Zoom I've done.
We're about to take a mountain vacation in the Asheville area.
Cool.
And I was thinking, I really need to take a couple copies along, because it makes the mountains so much more real for the family.
Yeah.
I always like to have a book you can grab, in a slow moment, or I could always finish it when I came home. But,
awesome.
The bookstores out there, you have kind of a mountain look. If you were out there, I wish they would feature your book, because it has so much to do with mountains in the area. I love that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure that if you wandered into a bookstore in Asheville that you would find it. Because it's a small publisher with limited distribution, it basically appears on bookshelves. Certainly locally in the Triangle area, the bookstores have been really supportive. But elsewhere in the country, it would only be if you'd asked for them to pull it in from their distributor. And that's just one of the real life limitations of working with a smaller publisher.
I see. So I'd have to buy it in Raleigh and take it with me probably.
Yeah, Quail Ridge should still have signed copies. I try and keep them supplied. So I would think you'd have luck there.
Okay,
And
great.
of course, you can order it online if you prefer online ordering from, Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and those places definitely will ship it to you through an online order.
Great.
And remember that you get 21% off by saying that you are a Wonderland Book Club member at Quail Ridge.
There you go.
Yay.
Don't forget about that.
Right.
And that's for all our books, I believe. We've got Tracy. Did they take your book? I'm trying to remember that you got that done, right?
Yeah, I got it done. So I'm just waiting and I saw that they ordered it. So I'm just waiting so I can go there and get a picture of it.
Good.
Yeah, because I think last month's was the only one where it was a special order, but I think everybody going forward is part of Quail Ridge, which is really, really nice.
Yeah.
It's really that wasn't the case a couple of years ago. So Quail Ridge is wonderfully accommodating. But anybody else have questions before we wrap up?
Great.
Go ahead, Janine.
So
Mary.
I'm appalled to hear that this book is not getting wider distribution. This was one of the most gripping tales I have ever read. It was just amazing to me how well you moved the action forward while simultaneously developing the characters and describing the terrain and events. I mean, I felt like I was there. I'd been places like you were talking about. I remember when I was still working for the Environment Agency, driving through the forest, national forest roads on those old logging roads. It was exactly like you described. And you'd run into the tree that was down across the road and the giant rocks. And it was just astounding to me that you could write that and not have actually lived it, because it felt like I was living it with you. And the part where you're describing the fire, a book that's written for firefighters wouldn't talk about the pop as the flames hit each tree. That was just amazing. And particularly the part where they're heading for that pond as a last ditch. And then they get in the pond, and it's not easy. It's not like I was hoping the fire would go around the pond. It went right over them. It was just incredible. How did you come up with the idea of having them go in the pond?
Yeah, so I definitely, was debating what steps along the way made sense. And, water certainly seemed to be logical, and I felt like that could work. I really worried about the size of the pond. Okay, is this big enough so that it would actually protect them? And the fires 2 years ago, I guess it was, out in California were horrific in their scope. But I was tremendously pleased to read about people who saved themselves by standing in their swimming pools. Mm-hmm. There were several people who, were completely surrounded by flames. And so I was delighted to hear that. All right, my pond is big enough to help, because they made it through in a swimming pool. And thank you for expressing dismay about not having a wider pickup. The book is still very available. The number of hardback copies, probably what's out in the world now, is it. They're not doing another publishing run. The ebook is very much alive, and the publisher is periodically putting that on sale, so that I think August will be another time period where the ebook is at $1.99. And then the paperback, when that comes out next February, certainly creates the possibility that the will find additional life. but the life of a book is quite short. Really, publishers expect to earn 90% of their earnings in the first 6 months. And right now, it looks like Wildland has got a longer tail than that. I mean, I think it will continue here for a while. But thank you. It's the distribution is more challenging for small publishers. The mechanics of distribution for this publisher are handled by Penguin Random House, but it's not the same approach as for a Big Five book. Like a Big Five book will be placed in Barnes and Nobles everywhere, for example. And the local Barnes and Nobles carried Wildland, but it didn't go beyond Central North Carolina.
Does it help if we contact friends around the country and tell them about this great book and ask them to ask either their library or their local bookstore to get it for them?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That is always a help. And the bookstore will be able to pull hard copies in as long as they exist. I mean, once they're all taken, they will disappear. Libraries are very focused on recent releases. And so it's more difficult to get much traction for a book that's been out for a year. More traction probably for the one that's coming out in September, just because that fits with the way they think about stocking their book.
Okay, so we can get ahead of the game and ask for it ahead of time.
Oh, go for it. Go for it. You guys are going to become my marketing team, which is not my strength.
I think you do a great job, Rebecca, with your marketing. So you know how to tag on Facebook. So many people just don't know how to tag. It's like, come on, how do I know that you wrote about me unless you tag me? You got the tagging real and the sharing. So I think that's all you need: tagging and sharing.
I guess that's the theory.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. But this was been a wonderful Wonderland. I'll get the YouTube all set for everybody, and we will share. Hopefully, we'll share some things on Facebook and tag each other and all that good stuff. And hopefully, if the stars line up, we'll be back in person in June. I got to check like 4 different things, but the majority of the club wants it. So is that still the case? Nobody changed their mind. But we'll see about doing something hybrid. I'll see what we can do. That would be awesome if Quail Ridge could do it, but I'm not. That's a little bit too much. Any final thoughts before we enjoy the nice long weekend?
Mm-hmm. Can't wait to meet in person, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time this morning.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Bye,
Thank
Rebecca.
you.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye, friends.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.